Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. Today is February 7th, Friday, and the Hebrew date today is the ninth of Shvat. In terms of the moon, what that means is that we are at 77% of a full moon right now, of a waxing moon. We have 4.6 days until the full moon, 20.1 days until the next new moon. In the sky tonight, visible if we have clear skies and you're up at the right time, are Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and also the moon if you are up at the right time. Constellations out right now: Orion, Scorpius, Gemini, Leo, Sagittarius, Cygnus, Taurus, Andromeda, Virgo, Libra, Aquarius, Aries, Pisces, and Cancer. This week's parasha, the Willamette River. The Willamette River is currently flowing at 17,400 cubic feet per second, which is on the low side. The median is 33,700 cubic feet for historically for this day, and the 75th percentile is 52,100 cubic feet per second. So we are below the median. In fact, we are below the 25th percentile. So the 25th percentile for this day is 18,700 cubic feet per second. The high on this day was 171,000 cubic feet per second in 1925. The low was 4,810 cubic feet per second in 1977. This week's parasha is Parashat Bishalach from the book of Shemot, from the book of Exodus. So this is the parasha in which the manna from heaven appears. So the way that this story is told by the Pinine Halacha, his name is Eliezer Malamed, and he is a contemporary posek halachic decider and explainer in Israel. And he shares that during the 40 years that our ancestors wandered in the desert, HaKadosh Baruch Hu provided them with food from heaven, and this food was known as man, um, just memnun, um, and through it, God taught Israel how they should relate to food and to livelihood. So when the man appears in the morning, it says the dew lifts up, and then all around the camp, on the ground, on the bushes, is the stuff that looks like the size of a coriander seed and is very sweet. Um, it's called is seen there, collected in all the bushes, and the Israelites ask manhu, what is this stuff? And because they said manhu, the material became known as man, or in the way we say it in English is manna from heaven. So the Israelites ate man for 40 years in the desert. And the Pnini Halacha says that it was through the man that God taught Israel how you can relate to food and to livelihood. So the Torah says, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. So the test was that they were commanded to gather enough each day for the needs of that day and not to leave any over for the next day. This is very challenging because it is a pretty natural existential concern for a human being that you will have enough food. And because of this existential concern, which is related to the fear of discomfort, but also the fear of starvation, not having enough clothing, having enough shelter, being at the mercy of the elements, that humans have this very powerful impulse to eat up as much as possible and to pursue kind of unlimited accumulation of money and assets. So the Israelites wanted to store up more manna because it was creepy to um, to be so dependent on this strange food that you had to harvest each day. So, but because of this desire to sort of store up food, have more than enough, um, we become enslaved. It's very common for humans to become enslaved to our work and to our impulses. God wished to instill in the Israelites during their desert sojourn the proper attitude toward livelihood, knowledge that your purpose in life is to cling to God and to Torah, and food and money are only a means to that end. As we read in Deuteronomy, God subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, in order to teach you that you do not live on bread alone, rather you live by the word of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, uh, the Israelites were commanded to gather enough food for one day and to rely on God to send more the next day. One who failed this test and gathered extra would actually find when they got home to their tent that they only had exactly what they actually needed. An omer per capita is what they say. Some people could not overcome their fear, and they tried to save some of their allotted manna for the next day, but it actually turned foul and got filled with maggots. So by the next day, it was inedible. When Friday came, however, there was a surprise because on the sixth day, the Israelites would gather twice as much manna, um, 2 omers each, and when the chieftains of the community came and told Moshe this, that they had gathered two omers per person, in the past, right, the other days of the week, they would try to gather more, but one of the miraculous aspects of the manna was that when you got back to your tent, you still just had exactly what you needed. You would somehow the stuff that you had gathered extra has disappeared. And if out of fear you tried to store the manna over to the next day, sort of rationing yourself, the manna would go rotten. However, on Friday, they gathered manna more than they needed, and they got home and discovered that they were, for some reason, able to keep twice as much as they were from any other day. What's more is that when they got up in the morning on Shabbat, the extra manna that they had gathered was not full of worms. It hadn't gone bad, and it stayed good until the end of Shabbat. So this is the nature of the miraculous food of the manna. So some people, so the Torah says, "Eat the manna today, for today is Hakadosh Baruch Hu's Shabbat. You will not find it today in the field. You will not find the manna in the field on Shabbat." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the seventh day because they were scared. They went out to gather, but they didn't find any manna on that day. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu then says, "How long are these people going to refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings?" Note that Hakadosh Baruch Hu has given you Shabbat. Therefore, Hashem gives you 2 days' food on the sixth day. Let everyone remain where they are. Let no one leave their place on the seventh day. Meaning, don't go out to try to gather on that day. So the sages state that the blessing of Shabbat was reflected in the double portion of manna that fell. One might be inclined to ask what kind of blessing this was, since, in fact, the amount of manna that the people received on Shabbat was the same as the rest of the week. It simply fell a day early. The answer is that on the seventh day they did not have to worry because their Shabbat food had already been prepared on Friday. This can be compared to one who had to work hard every day. One day, they managed to finish 2 days worth of work. The next day, the person felt a great sense of relief because he didn't need to work. They didn't need to work, and they were free to think about things beyond their immediate needs. Sometimes, because of these musings about thinking about things that are beyond your basic needs, you are later able to accomplish more at work because you have that break. This is the blessing of Shabbat. We're commanded to stop working and stop worrying about money. And through this freedom and liberation, we cling to God and God's Torah. Doing so will allow blessing to flow from the source of life, providing us with a comfortable livelihood during the sixth weekdays. So this is according to the Penine Halacha Eliezer Melamed. What we're dealing with is a commonly known phenomena in the human psyche of abundance versus scarcity. And these are in in very interesting ways attitudes that are not necessarily reflective of reality. Many a person in the world, many a person that many of us Americans would consider desperately poor, experiences abundance, and many of us who are abundantly rich experience scarcity. I have a friend who was a taxi driver for many years, and I said, "You must have learned so much about humanity in that time." And he said, "Not really. I can't really make any generalizations about humanity except for one. um, Wealthy people, more affluent people, tip less than poor people do." And so this was this was the one generalization about humanity he could come up with after many years of working as a taxi driver. So so it's interesting. We know this from our own experience. We know it from many sacred texts and traditions around the world that there's something about amassing um, amassing wealth, amassing possessions that does not actually curb the attitude of scarcity, and sometimes it increases the sense of scarcity. And conversely, interestingly, when people have they have nothing left to lose, and so they tend to. It's very often in poor societies, people share more and are more communally minded about what little they have. So these are in large part attitudes that are not actually dependent on external circumstances. And what Shabbat is about allowing for the reality that 6 days a week you understand you have to get up and make your living, get by in the world. This is the way of the world, whether you are a self-sustaining farmer, or you are a professor at Willamette, or you are a rabbi. Whatever it is, you have to do this 6 days a week in order to earn your bread, so to speak. When Shabbat comes, you actually practice entering into an abundance mindset. It's enough. That God on the sixth day, God finished the heavens and the earth. They were completed in all of their array. And God rests on the seventh day. That God rests on the seventh day from all the work they had set out to do. So on the day of Shabbat, we enter into this mindset of abundance, saying we have enough. Whatever we have is going to be enough. So this is why it is because of this passage that on Friday nights, on Shabbat, it is customary to use two halot, put out 2 loaves of challah to represent the double portion of man that is collected by the Israelites on Friday. So that's the zecher. That is the double 2 loaves of challah. But on a deeper level, 2 loaves of challah represents abundance. And the more we live into an abundance mindset, the more we train ourselves to have enough and to appreciate having enough and to appreciate that what we have in that moment is enough, the more we can carry that attitude into the week. And this is the idea with Shabbat, is that we enter into an abundance mindset so that we can carry an abundance mindset into the rest of our working lives and have Shabbat inform inform our working life. Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.